The Hells Angels biker found the little girl holding a tarnished wrist tag near a checkpoint, and the truth inside broke him open. Hello everyone. Before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It's quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. Now let's dive into the story. It was a cold, windy evening when Jake Reaper Morrison, a seasoned Hells Angels biker, was making his usual run along the desolate highway. The engine of his motorcycle roared through the thick fog, cutting through the silence of the empty road. The chill of the night air bit at his face, but it was the kind of cold he'd grown used to. His mind wandered as the miles slipped beneath his tires. He was used to the solitude that came with the life of a biker, but something about this night felt different, almost unsettling. As he approached a checkpoint, he noticed a figure in the distance, small, almost fragile against the backdrop of the highway. It was a little girl, no more than 7 or 8 years old, standing by the road, her eyes wide with fear. In her hand, she gripped something tightly, a tarnished wrist tag. It was barely visible in the dim light, but Jake could make out the faint outline of the markings. He slowed his bike as he neared her, sensing something wasn't right. The girl didn't run, didn't scream. She just stood there, her small frame trembling. Jake pulled over and dismounted his motorcycle, the sound of his boots hitting the pavement cutting through the cold air. He could see that she was scared, her eyes darting around nervously. "Hey little one, you okay?" He called out, his voice gruff, but not unkind. The girl flinched at the sound of his voice, clearly terrified. She looked up at him, her lips trembling, her grip tightening on the wrist tag in her hand. Jake's heart clenched at the sight. "I'm not going to hurt you," he reassured her, taking a cautious step forward. The girl hesitated for a moment before speaking, her voice barely above a whisper. "Please, help me," she said, her words laced with fear. "My mom, she's gone, and I don't know where I am." Jake's stomach twisted. He crouched down to her level, trying to make himself seem less intimidating. "What's your name, kid?" he asked softly. "Lucy," she replied, her voice barely audible as she wiped her tear-streaked face. Jake's eyes fell to the wrist tag in her hand. It looked old, worn out, but there was something about it, something that told him this wasn't just a random lost child. The tag was no ordinary trinket. There was something deeply personal about it. Without thinking, Jake reached out and gently took the wrist tag from her hand, inspecting it closely. The markings were hard to make out, but there was a certain familiarity in the design, one that seemed to tug at the corners of his memory. It wasn't long before he realized why. The design was a match to a symbol he had seen before, a symbol linked to a chapter of Hells Angels he had known in the past. Jake's heart raced as he connected the dots. This wasn't just any lost child. There was a deeper story here, one that he was now tangled in. He glanced at Lucy, who was watching him with those wide, innocent eyes, trusting him, even in her fear. Without a second thought, Jake pulled out his phone and called his closest friend in the club. "We need to find out who she is, and fast," Jake said, his voice steady despite the rush of thoughts running through his head. This was just the beginning, he knew. The truth behind the wrist tag was more than just a mystery. It was a connection to something dark, something that would change everything for both him and Lucy. As Jake hung up the phone, his mind raced. He stared at Lucy, who was now sitting on the edge of the road, the cold wind tugging at her coat. Her eyes, still wide with fear, never left him. He could see the confusion, the hurt, and the fear. Too much for someone so young. Jake knew she needed answers, but the more he thought about the wrist tag she held so tightly, the more he realized that this wasn't just some random encounter. There was something more to it, something dark, and it was drawing him. And deeper. His bike roared to life as he mounted it once more, Lucy gingerly climbing onto the back. She wrapped her arms around his waist, the smallest, yet firm grip of a child who had no choice but to trust. As they sped off, the town's lights faded behind them, swallowed by the darkness of the highway. The wind howled through the night, and Jake tried to focus, but his thoughts kept drifting back to the wrist tag. He had seen that symbol before, years ago, when he was part of a chapter that was involved in some very shady deals. But that was a lifetime ago. Or so he thought. Jake's phone buzzed again. It was his old friend, Steele. "I'm on my way to meet you." "What's going on, Reaper?" Steele's voice crackled through the speaker. "You're not going to believe this, Steele. I need you to dig into something for me. A little girl, Lucy. She's holding a tarnished wrist tag, one from an old chapter one used to know. I need to find out who she is, fast." Steele paused. "Are you serious? What's the connection?" Jake's grip tightened on the handlebars, his knuckles turning white. "I'm not sure yet. But the tag. It's got a connection to the Hells Angels, and I've seen it before. I just need to know where it came from, and why she's holding on to it." Steele's voice softened. "All right, Reaper. I'll get on it. But be careful. There's more to this than you think. You don't want to stir up old ghosts." Jake wasn't sure what Steele meant by that, but he didn't have time to ask. "Just do what you can. I'm heading to my place now." He hung up and focused on the road ahead. The streets were empty, the quiet only broken by the hum of his motorcycle and the occasional howl of the wind. Lucy shifted uneasily behind him, her small hands gripping his waist tighter as they approached the outskirts of town. The dark outline of his old garage came into view, nestled in a forgotten part of the town. It had been years since he'd been there, but it still felt like home. He pulled up to the building, the familiar smell of motor oil and gasoline wafting through the air. "This is where we'll figure it out," he said softly, turning off the engine. He helped Lucy off the bike, holding her gently as she stumbled in the cold. The garage was empty, save for a few old bikes and tools scattered across the floor. Jake led Lucy inside, the door creaking as it opened. He knew this place well. It was where he had spent countless hours fixing bikes, but it also held memories he'd rather forget. The weight of his past, the brotherhood he had left behind, the things he had done, they all seemed to linger in the shadows of this place. Jake led Lucy to the back of the garage, where a desk sat in the corner, piled high with old papers and boxes. He rifled through the stack of papers, trying to focus, but his mind kept drifting back to the wrist tag. It wasn't just some relic from the past. It was a symbol, one that had been linked to dangerous people. He could feel the past pulling at him, threatening to swallow him whole. "Are you okay?" Jake turned to see Lucy standing near the desk, her small face upturned in confusion. "Yeah, kid. I'm fine. Just trying to figure things out." He turned back to the papers and found an old file, one that looked like it hadn't been touched in years. As he flipped through the yellowed pages, a name caught his eye: Sarah Richardson. Jake's breath caught in his throat. He had heard that name before, years ago. It was connected to a family that had been involved in some dark dealings, ones Jake had never wanted to be a part of. But as he read further, he realized the connection was deeper than he thought. Sarah Richardson wasn't just any woman. She had been tied to the old chapter he had been a part of. And Lucy? Lucy was her daughter. The truth hit Jake like a ton of bricks. The little girl he had just met wasn't just some innocent bystander. She was a part of something much larger. Something that had been buried, forgotten, and now, it was all coming back. Jake's mind raced as the pieces started to fall into place. He had to protect her, no matter what it took. He turned to Lucy, his eyes softening. "We're going to get to the bottom of this, kid. I promise you that." The storm outside grew louder, the wind howling against the walls of the garage. Jake knew they were running out of time. Whatever was coming, it was coming fast. And the truth inside that tarnished wrist tag was just the beginning. The sound of the wind outside howled through the cracks in the old garage, but inside, Jake's mind was silent, focused on the file in front of him. His hands, though rough and worn from years of labor, trembled slightly as he flipped through the pages. The name Sarah Richardson felt like a knife twisting in his gut. He had spent years running from his past, from the mistakes that defined him, but now, with Lucy standing in front of him, it seemed impossible to escape. He needed answers, and fast. He closed the file with a sharp snap, his eyes narrowing as his thoughts raced. This wasn't just about helping a lost little girl. It was about something bigger, something dangerous. He knew Sarah Richardson, or at least, he used to. She had been a part of the old chapter before it all fell apart. A life tangled with lies, betrayal, and a darkness that Jake had left behind. But Lucy, standing there with that tarnished wrist tag, was a connection to a past he thought was buried. He couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to this story. He needed to find out who had left the wrist tag behind, and why Lucy was holding on to it like it was her lifeline. He looked over at her, sitting quietly in the corner of the garage, her small hands folded in her lap. She was so young, too young to be caught up in something like this. But the circumstances had dragged her into a world that wasn't safe. Jake knew he couldn't protect her from everything, but he could give her the truth. "Hey, Lucy," he said softly, his voice rough but steady. She looked up at him, her eyes wide and filled with an innocence that only a child could carry. "I know this is hard, but I need you to tell me everything you remember about the tag. Where did you find it? And why do you think it's so important?" Lucy hesitated for a moment, her small fingers nervously twisting the fabric of her coat. I don't really remember. It was in my mom's room. I used to watch her wear it. She told me it was special, that it belonged to someone she loved a long time ago. She said it was a reminder to be brave." Jake's heart tightened at her words. He had heard stories about Sarah, about her past, and the choices she had made, but hearing it from Lucy made it real in a way he couldn't ignore. The girl wasn't just holding on to a piece of jewelry. She was holding on to the last remnants of a life that had been stolen from her. Jake stood up from the desk, his mind made up. He wasn't going to let this little girl slip through the cracks. He had to find out who was behind this, who had left Lucy to fend for herself in a world that didn't care about her. He grabbed his jacket, the weight of his decision sinking in. "We're going to find out who did this," he said, more to himself than to her. Lucy didn't respond, but the way she clutched her wrist tag tightly in her hands told him she believed him. She needed to believe in something, and for the moment, Jake was all she had. He walked over to the bike, his fingers brushing the cold metal. He had lived a life of violence and destruction, but this was different. He was about to face a new kind of battle, one where he had no idea what he was up against. He started the engine, the roar of the motorcycle cutting through the heavy silence. "Let's go," he said, and Lucy climbed onto the back of the bike, her small arms wrapping around his waist. As they drove through the night, the world seemed to blur around them, the wind whipping through the streets, carrying them deeper into the unknown. Jake's mind raced, piecing together what he knew about Sarah and her past. There were too many unanswered questions, too many connections he wasn't ready to face. But he couldn't turn back now. The only way out was forward, and Lucy was depending on him. They arrived at a rundown motel on the outskirts of town. The neon sign buzzed weakly, casting a dim glow over the empty parking lot. Jake pulled up to the entrance and parked the bike. He turned to Lucy. "Stay here. I'll be right back." He didn't wait for her response, already striding towards the office. Inside, a grizzled man with a thick beard and a cigarette dangling from his lips looked up. "What can I do for you?" Jake's voice was low, controlled. "I'm looking for someone. A woman named Sarah Richardson. You ever hear of her?" The man's eyes flickered with recognition, but he quickly masked it. "I don't know anyone by that name," he muttered, but Jake could tell he was lying. "Look, I'm not here for trouble," Jake said, leaning in slightly, his tone hardening. "Just tell me where she is, and I'll leave. No questions asked." The man hesitated, then sighed. "She used to stay here, but she's gone. Last I heard, she was in with a group. They were trouble, all of them." Jake's eyes narrowed. "What kind of group?" The man exhaled smoke, the answer clear in his eyes. "The kind that doesn't leave loose ends." Jake's gut twisted. He knew exactly who the man was talking about. The Hells Angels chapter he had been a part of was known for dealing with its own problems, by any means necessary. And Sarah Richardson, it seemed, had become entangled with them once again. He turned and walked out of the office, his mind racing. This was bigger than he had thought, and he was now in the middle of it, with no way out. The motorcycle's engine roared to life as Jake sped down the desolate highway, the cold wind whipping against his face, the weight of the situation settling heavy in his chest. The motel owner's words echoed in his mind. The kind that doesn't leave loose ends. Jake knew exactly what that meant. The Hells Angels had their ways of dealing with people who tried to walk away, and Sarah Richardson, it seemed, had crossed a dangerous line. He had to find her before things escalated any further. The headlights of his bike cut through the night, guiding him as he followed the directions the man at the motel had reluctantly provided. As the miles stretched on, Jake's thoughts kept drifting back to Lucy. The little girl had been through more than any child should have to endure. She was caught up in a world she didn't understand, a world Jake had tried to leave behind, but now it seemed to be pulling him back in. The road ahead was a blur as he pushed the bike harder, the engine's growl echoing in the stillness of the night. He couldn't afford to waste any more time. He had to get to the bottom of this. As he neared the address, Jake slowed down, scanning the area. The street was quiet, the houses run down and abandoned, just like the town he'd left behind years ago. There was a sense of emptiness in the air, as if this place had been forgotten by everyone, even time. He parked the bike a few blocks away, hidden in the shadows, and surveyed the area on foot. The house was small, a dilapidated cottage with broken windows and a sagging porch. It didn't look like anyone had lived there in years, but Jake knew better than to trust appearances. This was exactly the kind of place Sarah would hide in, a place where she could lay low, away from the prying eyes of the law and the people she was running from. He crept closer to the house, every step deliberate and cautious. As he reached the front door, he could see a faint light flickering through the curtains. Someone was inside. Jake's pulse quickened as he knocked softly, the sound barely audible over the howling wind. He waited for a moment, then knocked again, louder this time. The door creaked open just a crack, and a pair of wary eyes peered out. "What do you want?" a woman's voice asked, rough with suspicion. Jake didn't waste any time. "Sarah Richardson," he said, his voice low but firm. "I need to speak with her." The woman's eyes narrowed, her grip on the door tightening. "She's not here," she said quickly, her tone defensive. Jake didn't buy it. "I know she's here. I'm not leaving until I speak with her." There was a long pause, and then the door opened wider, revealing a woman in her mid-30s, wearing a worn-out sweater and jeans. Her hair was messy, her face drawn with exhaustion. "What do you want with Sarah?" she asked, her voice trembling slightly. Jake sized her up, his instincts telling him that she wasn't telling the full truth. "I'm looking for answers," he said, his tone more gentle now. "I know Sarah's involved in something dangerous, and I need to find her before things get worse." The woman hesitated for a moment, then stepped aside. "Come in," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. Jake entered the house, his eyes scanning the interior. It was dimly lit, the walls covered with old, faded photographs and scraps of paper. There was a musty smell in the air, the scent of something long forgotten. "Sarah's been staying here for a while," the woman said, closing the door behind him. "She's not involved in anything dangerous, though. She's just trying to survive." Jake's gut tightened. He knew the kind of survival she was talking about. He had seen it before. "Where is she?" he asked again, his voice growing more insistent. "I don't know exactly," the woman said, her voice faltering. "She left a few days ago. She said she was going to meet someone, but she didn't tell me where." Jake's frustration was growing. He was getting closer, but he still didn't have all the answers. "Do you have any idea who she was meeting?" The woman shook her head, tears welling up in her eyes. "I don't know. She wouldn't tell me. She's been so distant lately, like she's afraid of something. I think she's scared, but she won't talk to me about it." Jake's mind raced. He had a feeling he knew what Sarah was afraid of. The Hells Angels. It all pointed back to them. "Do you have anything of hers?" he asked, desperation creeping into his voice. The woman hesitated for a moment, then walked over to a small table in the corner of the room. She picked up a picture frame, turning it over to reveal a small key taped to the back. "This is all I have," she said, handing it to Jake. "She left this behind." Jake took the key, his fingers brushing against the worn paper. There was something familiar about it, something that seemed to call out to him. "Do you know what this unlocks?" he asked. The woman shook her head. "No, I don't know. But she had it with her all the time. It's the only thing she didn't leave behind." Jake's mind raced as he turned the key over in his hand. He had to find out what it unlocked. Whatever it was connected to Sarah, and it was connected to Lucy. The pieces were starting to fall into place, but the picture was still incomplete. He had to find Sarah, and he had to find her. Fast. Whatever secrets she was hiding, Jake was going to uncover them, no matter what it took. Jake pocketed the key, his mind racing. He had hoped for answers, but the more he dug, the deeper the mystery became. He looked at the woman, who was still standing in the doorway, watching him with a mixture of fear and concern. "Is there anywhere else she could be?" Jake asked, his voice tight. "Anywhere she might have gone?" The woman hesitated, her eyes darting to the worn photograph on the table, and then back to Jake. "There's an old storage unit outside of town. I don't know if she's been there, but I heard her mention it once. She said she needed to hide something. Something important." Jake nodded, a sense of urgency flooding him. This was the break he had been waiting for. The storage unit could be the key to unlocking the rest of the puzzle, and if Sarah had gone there, It was his best chance of finding her. "Where is it?" he asked, already turning toward the door. The woman gave him the address, but Jake didn't waste any time. He turned and walked toward his bike, Lucy still sitting quietly in the garage, her small hands clutching the wrist tag. "You stay here," Jake said softly to her. "I'll be back soon." Lucy nodded without saying a word, her big brown eyes filled with something between hope and fear. Jake started the engine and pulled out of the garage, heading toward the outskirts of town. The streets were darker now, the streetlights flickering and casting long shadows across the empty roads. As he drove, his thoughts kept drifting back to Sarah. What had she gotten herself into? What kind of life had she been running from? And most importantly, what was it that she had been trying to protect Lucy from? The storage unit was located in a rundown part of town, tucked behind an abandoned strip mall. Jake pulled into the lot and parked his bike, the hum of the engine fading into the stillness of the night. The place was deserted, the air thick with the scent of decay and neglect. He walked up to the entrance, the dim light from a single hanging bulb casting an eerie glow over the cracked concrete. As he approached the storage units, a rusted gate creaked open. In the wind, revealing a row of locked doors, each one seemingly forgotten by time. Jake scanned the area, looking for any signs of life, but there was nothing. He pulled out the key the woman had given him and tried it in the first lock. It turned easily, and with a slight push, the door creaked open. Inside was a small, empty unit, but there was something on the floor, a box, old and battered, its corners worn from years of neglect. Jake bent down and opened it, his fingers brushing against the dust-covered surface. Inside, there were a few papers, some old photographs, and a small, leather-bound journal. The journal caught his attention immediately. It was well-worn, the cover frayed from years of use. He flipped it open, and the first page was filled with Sarah's handwriting. His heart skipped a beat as he read the words. The journal was a record, a story of her life, of the things she had done to protect Lucy, the things she had tried to escape from. Each page was a confession, a cry for help, a glimpse into the darkness she had been living in. But what struck Jake the most was the final entry. "I have to hide her," it read. "If they find her, they'll use her against me. I can't let that happen. She's all I have left. I've made a deal with the devil, and now I have to protect her from the consequences." Jake closed the journal, his mind racing with questions. What had Sarah gotten involved in? And who was she hiding from? He couldn't stop thinking about the wrist tag. The tarnished metal, the symbol. It had to mean something, but what? He stood up and looked around the storage unit, his eyes falling on a small, locked chest in the corner. He hadn't noticed it before, but now, it seemed too important to ignore. He walked over and tried the lock, but it was stubborn, refusing to budge. With a deep breath, Jake took out his pocket knife and pried the lock open. Inside, there was a stash of cash, stacks of it, along with a few other items, bullets, a gun, and a small, black notebook. Jake picked up the notebook, flipping through it quickly. It was filled with names, addresses, and dates, all of them connected to people Jake recognized, people from his past. His breath caught in his throat as he realized what he was looking at. This was a list of people connected to the Hells Angels, people who were involved in something far darker than he had ever imagined. But there was one name that stood out above the rest, Mark Richardson. Jake's heart sank. Mark was Sarah's ex-husband, a man who had been involved in some shady business. But to see his name in this notebook, it confirmed everything. Sarah had been running from him, and whatever she had been hiding, it was bigger than either of them could have ever imagined. Jake felt the weight of the situation hit him. This wasn't just about protecting a little girl. This was about stopping a dangerous cycle that had already claimed too many lives. The road ahead was going to be dangerous, but Jake was determined. He wasn't going to let Sarah, or Lucy, fall victim to it any longer. He stuffed the notebook into his jacket and closed the storage unit door behind him, the sound echoing in the empty lot. As he mounted his bike and started the engine, his mind was already working on the next step. He was going to find Sarah, and he was going to end this, once and for all. Jake's mind raced as he sped down the darkened highway, the roar of his motorcycle filling the night air. The pieces were falling into place, but the more he uncovered, the more dangerous the situation became. He could feel the weight of the choices ahead of him. He wasn't just looking for Sarah anymore. He was chasing a ghost from his past, a shadow he thought he had left behind. The more he thought about Mark Richardson's name in that notebook, the more he realized how deep this ran. Sarah had been running, not just from her ex-husband, but from something much darker. Something that had ties to the Hells Angels that Jake could no longer deny. He needed answers, and the only way to get them was to confront the past he had long since buried. Jake pulled into a small diner just outside of town, the neon sign flickering above. He killed the engine and stepped off the bike, his boots hitting the pavement with a quiet thud. It was time to talk to someone who might know more, someone who had been close to Mark. Inside, the diner was nearly empty, save for an older man sitting at the counter, sipping his coffee. Jake's eyes scanned the room before he approached the man. The bartender, a woman in her 40s, looked up when Jake walked in. "What can I get you?" she asked, her voice thick with southern charm. "I'm looking for someone," Jake said, his tone calm but firm. "Mark Richardson. You ever heard of him?" The woman hesitated for a moment before nodding. "Yeah, I've heard of him. Who wants to know?" Jake's hand hovered near his jacket pocket where he kept the small notebook, his mind already on the next step. Someone who needs answers. Someone who's been looking for him for a long time. The bartender studied him carefully, then leaned in closer, lowering her voice. "Mark's trouble always has been. You're not the first to ask about him, and you sure as hell won't be the last." Jake's eyes narrowed, his patience starting to wear thin. "What does that mean? Where can I find him?" The woman wiped the counter with a rag, avoiding Jake's gaze. "Mark's not around much anymore. He's got his hands in all sorts of stuff, you know. But you might want to try his old haunts, places he used to go before things went south. The old warehouse on 7th Street might be a good start. But I'm warning you," she added, her voice soft but urgent. "Be careful. People who go looking for Mark don't always come back the same." Jake nodded, already knowing the risks. "Thanks," he said, his voice low and grateful. He turned and walked out of the diner, heading straight for his bike. As he mounted it, the weight of the situation settled over him again. He wasn't just chasing answers anymore. He was chasing a man who had the power to change everything for both him and Lucy. The warehouse was on the outskirts of town, a dark, imposing structure that had been abandoned for years. Jake parked his bike a few blocks away, the air thick with tension. He wasn't sure what he was going to find there, but he knew it wouldn't be easy. The past had a way of catching up to you, especially when you try to run from it. As he walked toward the warehouse, the silence of the night seemed to press in around him. The building loomed ahead, its windows broken and boarded up, a forgotten relic of a life Jake had tried to escape. But tonight, he was walking right back into that life. He pushed open the rusted door, the hinges groaning in protest. Inside, the air was musty and stale, the floor covered in dust and debris. The warehouse was empty, but Jake could feel the presence of something, or someone, lurking in the shadows. "Mark Richardson," Jake called out, his voice echoing off the walls. "I know you're here." For a moment, there was nothing but the sound of his own breathing, the silence stretching on. Then, from the far corner of the warehouse, a figure emerged, slowly stepping into the dim light. Mark Richardson. He was older now, his hair graying, his face harder, but Jake could still see the remnants of the man he used to know. Mark's eyes narrowed as he looked at Jake, recognition flashing across his face. "Reaper," he said, his voice rough with years of bitterness. "I knew you'd come for me eventually." Jake stood tall, his eyes locked on Mark. "I'm not here for you," he said, his voice cold and steady. "I'm here for Sarah. And Lucy. I need answers." Mark laughed, a dry, humorless sound that echoed in the empty space. "Sarah? You think I'm the one who has the answers about her?" He shook his head, a twisted grin spreading across his face. "You've got it all wrong, Reaper. This isn't about Sarah. It's about power. It's about control." Jake stepped forward, his fists clenched at his sides. "You don't get to hide behind that anymore, Mark. What happened to Sarah? What happened to Lucy?" Mark's smile faltered for a moment, and Jake saw a flicker of something, fear, regret, but it was gone as quickly as it had come. "You really think Sarah's some innocent victim?" Mark spat, his tone venomous. "She made her choice a long time ago. And now, so have you." The room grew colder, the tension thickening. Jake could feel the danger closing in, but he wasn't backing down. He had come too far. "What did you do to them, Mark?" he demanded. Mark's eyes darkened, and for a moment, Jake saw a flicker of the man who had once been part of the Hells Angels, the man who had led them through some of their darkest days. "But," Now, that man was gone, replaced by someone who would do anything to hold on to the power he had. I didn't do anything, Mark said, his voice low. But you're too late, Reaper. She's already gone. And as for Lucy, he trailed off, the words hanging in the air like a promise of something more. Jake's blood ran cold. What did you do to her? He asked, his voice barely a whisper. Mark's grin returned, twisted and malicious. You'll find out soon enough. Jake stood frozen, staring at Mark as the words hung in the air. A chill ran down his spine as he processed what Mark had said. You'll find out soon enough. That sentence, dripping with malice, sent a surge of dread through him. What did Mark mean by that? What had happened to Sarah and Lucy? The silence between them grew unbearable. The flickering light from the broken windows cast long shadows across the warehouse floor, and Jake could almost feel the walls closing in. Mark's smug expression never faltered, but Jake saw the thin veil of fear in his eyes. It was the fear of a man who knew something he shouldn't have. He wasn't going to give Jake the answers easily, not without some kind of cost. Jake clenched his fists, his jaw tightening. Tell me what you did to them, Mark, he demanded again, his voice calm but filled with deadly intent. Mark raised an eyebrow, as if enjoying the power he still held in this moment. You think you can just waltz in here and demand answers? Mark scoffed. You're still the same reckless fool you were back then. Always rushing in, never thinking. That's why you failed, Reaper. The use of his old nickname, the one tied to his past with the Hells Angels, stung like a punch to the gut. Jake's breath hitched for a moment, but he didn't let Mark see his weakness. He wasn't here to revisit old wounds. He was here to find Sarah and Lucy, to bring them home. I'm not here for a history lesson, Jake said, his voice cold. I'm here to find them. Where are they? Mark's eyes shifted, a brief flash of unease crossing his face. You really think you can just undo everything? Mark sneered, stepping closer, his voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. Sarah made her choices long ago. And, Lucy, you're too late. The people you're chasing, they're not who you think they are. They never were. Jake's stomach twisted as he processed the words. Something didn't add up. What are you talking about? He asked, his voice a low growl. Who's behind this? Who's pulling the strings? Mark didn't answer right away. Instead, he looked away, his gaze lingering on something in the shadows of the warehouse. Jake's instincts kicked in. Mark was hiding something, and he knew if he pushed him, he would finally break. He took a step forward, his eyes never leaving Mark's face. You know where they are, Jake said, his voice calm but deadly. Tell me now. Mark hesitated, his eyes flickering to the side. For a brief moment, it seemed like he was going to crack, but then the walls went back up. Mark sneered. You really think I'm scared of you? You're just like all the others, thinking you can come in and fix everything. But some things are beyond fixing. Jake's patience snapped. He grabbed Mark by the collar and slammed him against the wall with a force that rattled the shelves nearby. Don't test me, Mark. I've come too far to let you play games. Mark's eyes widened in surprise, and for a moment, the smugness faded from his face. You're making a mistake, Reaper, Mark said, his voice low and desperate. You don't know what you're getting into. There are people involved who'll destroy you, and they're coming for you next. Jake froze at the words. A cold chill spread through him as he realized the depth of what he was dealing with. This wasn't just about Sarah or Lucy anymore. This was bigger, far bigger than he had ever imagined. Who are they? Jake demanded, his grip tightening on Mark's collar. Mark's lips curled into a twisted smile. You'll meet them soon enough, he said, his voice laced with mockery. But you're already too late. They've already won. Jake's blood ran cold as the meaning of Mark's words hit him. The clock was ticking. Whoever these people were, they were closing in, and they weren't going to stop until they had everything they wanted. Tell me where they are, Jake growled. Mark just shook his head, a small laugh escaping his lips. You still don't get it, do you? You're already too far gone. You think you can save them? You think you can walk away from this? Mark's laughter echoed through the warehouse, hollow and menacing. Jake's eyes narrowed. Where is she, Mark? Mark leaned in, his face just inches from Jake's. Sarah's gone, and Lucy's not who you think she is. The truth's been right in front of you this whole time, and you've been too blind to see it. Jake's heart pounded in his chest. What truth? He whispered, his voice trembling with a mix of fear and rage. Mark smiled. You'll find out soon enough, he said again, his voice low and sinister. Jake slammed Mark against the wall once more, this time harder. Don't make me ask you again. Mark's face twisted with a mix of pain and amusement. You've already lost, Reaper. But fine, I'll tell you. The people who took Sarah and Lucy, they're not just after them. They're after you too. Jake's mind reeled. What do you mean? Mark's grin widened. They're hunting you, Reaper. They've been watching you ever since you walked away. And now, it's your turn to pay. Jake's blood ran cold. The realization hit him like a hammer. This was no longer just about saving Sarah or Lucy. This was about survival. Whoever was coming for him was playing a game, and he was deep in it. He wasn't just fighting for the past anymore. He was fighting for his life, and for Lucy's. Mark stepped back, his expression darkening. You're already too late, he repeated. They'll be here soon. And with those words, Mark turned and walked away, disappearing into the shadows of the warehouse. Jake stood there, his fists clenched, his mind racing. He wasn't sure who these people were or what they wanted, but one thing was clear. They weren't going to stop until they had what they came for. And Jake wasn't about to let that happen. Jake stood motionless in the warehouse, the weight of Mark's words echoing in his mind. The sense of urgency that had driven him to this point now surged stronger than ever. Mark's cryptic warning about someone coming for him and Lucy felt like a blow to the chest, but Jake wasn't the kind to back down. He knew it was time to act fast. There was no more room for hesitation. As Mark disappeared into the shadows, Jake turned on his heel and stormed out of the warehouse, his mind racing with possibilities. The night air hit him like a slap in the face as he mounted his bike, revving the engine with a force that sent a sharp thrill of adrenaline coursing through his veins. He was going after Sarah and Lucy, no matter what. He couldn't let them fall into whatever trap Mark was hinting at. He couldn't let history repeat itself. Jake knew he had to move quickly, but as he sped through the streets, he couldn't shake the feeling that he was being watched. The motorcycle hummed beneath him, and every turn, every shadow seemed to hold something just out of sight, just out of reach. He checked his rearview mirror constantly, trying to make out any movement in the darkness, but nothing stood out. The streets were empty, silent, as if the world itself was holding its breath. Finally, he reached a small, abandoned building at the edge of town. His pulse quickened as he slowed his bike to a stop. This was it. He had no idea what he would find inside, but every instinct told him he was on the right track. The building was dark, its windows boarded up, and the walls were covered with old graffiti. It looked like a place no one would dare to enter, but to Jake, it felt like home. He had spent years in places like this, places where danger waited in the shadows. Without hesitating, Jake dismounted and made his way toward the entrance. The door was slightly ajar, creaking in the wind as it swayed back and forth. He pushed it open, stepping inside with his hand on the handle of his gun, ready for whatever he might face. The inside was cold, damp, and musty. The air smelled like old wood and decay, but Jake didn't flinch. He had learned to block out everything but the task at hand. He moved through the building cautiously, his eyes darting around the darkened corners, his ears straining for any sound. It was eerily quiet. Too quiet. Jake's heart raced as he made his way to the back of the building, where he found a metal staircase leading to the second floor. He climbed the stairs slowly, every step echoing in the silence. When he reached the top, he saw a faint light coming from underneath a door at the end of the hallway. He approached the door carefully, trying to keep his steps as silent as possible. His hand was steady on the door handle as he turned it, pushing it open just enough to peek inside. What he saw made his heart stop. Sarah was there, sitting on the floor with her back against the wall, her face pale and drawn. Her eyes were closed, and she looked like she hadn't slept in days. Lucy was standing next to her, holding her hand, her small face filled with concern. But there was something off about the scene. Sarah's hands were bound, and Lucy was looking around nervously, her eyes darting to the corners of the room. Jake's breath caught in his throat. He pushed the door open fully, stepping into the room. Sarah's eyes snapped open, and she looked at him in shock, her lips trembling. "Jake? What are you doing here?" she whispered, her voice hoarse. "I came to get you," Jake said, his voice steady despite the rush of emotions flooding him. "We don't have much time. We need to go." Sarah shook her head, tears welling in her eyes. "I can't. They're watching us, Jake. We're trapped." Lucy looked up at him, her wide eyes full of fear. "Who's watching?" Jake asked, his voice quiet. Sarah closed her eyes, trying to collect herself. "The people Mark warned you about. They've been following us for weeks, Jake. They know everything. They're not just after me. They're after Lucy too. They'll use her to get to me, to get to the past I've been running from. Jake's heart tightened at her words. What do they want? He asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Sarah swallowed hard, her hands trembling as she pulled at the ropes around her wrists. They want to finish what they started. They're after something I took from them years ago, something that could destroy them. And now, they'll stop at nothing to get it back. Jake's mind raced as the pieces started to come together. What is it, Sarah? What did you take? She shook her head, the tears now falling freely down her face. I can't say. It's too dangerous. But you need to understand, they will kill us both to get it. Jake stepped forward, his eyes burning with determination. I'm not leaving you here, Sarah. I'll protect you. I'll protect Lucy. Sarah looked at him, her eyes filled with sorrow. You don't understand, Jake. You're already in danger just by being here. They know you're looking for us. They know you're connected to me. She paused, her voice trembling. You need to leave. You need to get out of here, and you need to take Lucy with you. It's the only way you'll be safe. But Jake wasn't listening. He wasn't going to leave without Sarah, and he wasn't going to let these people take what wasn't theirs. We're leaving together, he said firmly. He reached down to untie her ropes, his fingers working quickly, but as he did, a loud noise echoed through the building. A door slammed open, followed by the sound of heavy footsteps. Jake's heart raced as he stood up, pulling Sarah to her feet. They're here, Sarah whispered, her face pale with fear. We don't have much time. Jake's instincts kicked in. He grabbed Lucy's hand, pulling her close, and he nodded toward the window at the end of the room. We're going out that way. Stay close to me. The sound of footsteps grew louder, and Jake knew that they were seconds away from being discovered. He wasn't sure how he was going to get them out of there, but he wasn't going to let them fall into the hands of whoever was coming for them. Not without a fight. Jake felt the tension rise as the footsteps grew louder, reverberating through the walls of the warehouse. Tom was running out. He pulled Sarah and Lucy toward the window, his heart pounding as he scanned the room for any possible escape route. The window was small, but it was their only chance. The noise outside was unmistakable now. Boots on the concrete floor, voices muttering in the distance. Jake moved quickly, helping Sarah up onto the windowsill. Stay close, both of you, he instructed, his voice low but urgent. The air outside was cold, and the wind whipped through the crack in the window as Jake shoved it open. He could feel the pressure mounting, the reality of the danger sinking in. If they didn't get out now, they might never get another chance. He reached down and pulled Lucy up next, lifting her easily, despite the urgency of the situation. His eyes darted toward the door, listening to the sounds of the intruders drawing closer. Jake had no idea who they were, but the way they moved, controlled, deliberate, told him everything he needed to know. These weren't just random thugs. They were professionals, trained for situations like this. He helped Sarah through the window first, her movements slow and careful as she landed lightly on the ground below. I'm right behind you, Jake said, turning back to Lucy. The little girl's wide eyes looked up at him, filled with fear, but there was also a trust there, one that Jake couldn't afford to break. He took her hand firmly and helped her climb through the window, his heart hammering in his chest. When they were both outside, Jake took one last look back at the warehouse. The shadows inside seemed to stretch toward them, as if the building itself was trying to hold them in. He turned and pulled Lucy close, guiding her through the dark alley that ran behind the warehouse. Sarah was already ahead of them, her figure barely visible in the shadows. They had to keep moving, stay ahead of whoever was following them. Jake glanced over his shoulder, but there was nothing. No one was coming yet, but he knew it wouldn't be long. They made their way through the alley, the cold wind biting at their faces, and Jake's mind raced. The road ahead was uncertain, but he was determined to get them to safety. They had to stay one step ahead, or this would be over before it even started. We need to get to the bike, Jake muttered, his voice grim. Sarah nodded without speaking, her face tight with worry. They're coming, she whispered, her eyes darting nervously. We're not safe yet. Jake nodded. He knew. They weren't out of danger. Not by a long shot. But he couldn't stop now. They had to keep moving. He led them through the narrow alleyway, his senses on high alert, constantly scanning the surroundings. There were too many unknowns, too many people who wanted them dead, but Jake wasn't about to let that happen. They finally reached the end of the alley, where Jake's motorcycle was parked under the cover of a dark overhang. He looked around one last time, his eyes narrowing as he checked the street for any sign of pursuit. All clear. For now. Get on, Jake said, motioning for Sarah to climb onto the back of the bike. He helped Lucy up behind Sarah, making sure they were both settled before starting the engine. The bike roared to life, and Jake hit the throttle, speeding down the deserted street. The wind whipped past them, and Jake's mind was a whirlwind of thoughts, of plans, of possibilities. They had a slim chance of escaping the people who were after them, but Jake would make sure they took it. The night was dark, the streets empty, and the only sound was the roar of his motorcycle cutting through the silence. But even in the quiet, Jake could feel it, the weight of the danger that was closing in. The Hells Angels had always been a brotherhood built on loyalty, on strength, on power. But this was different. The people after them didn't care about loyalty or power. They only cared about control. And that was something Jake wasn't willing to give them. As they rode, he couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. It wasn't just the people after them. It was the sense of inevitability that hung in the air. No matter how fast they ran, no matter how hard they fought, Jake knew they would never be truly free. The past had a way of catching up to people, and he was living proof of that. But right now, he didn't have the luxury of worrying about that. He had to focus on getting them out, on keeping them safe. He pushed the bike harder, the engine growling beneath him as they sped through the empty streets. Sarah's grip on his waist tightened, and he could feel Lucy's small hands clutching her mother's coat. Jake's jaw tightened, his eyes scanning the road ahead. Stay low, and stay quiet, he said, his voice calm but forceful. If we're being followed, we'll lose them in the next few blocks. We just need to keep moving. Sarah didn't respond, but Jake could feel her nodding behind him. She was just as determined as he was. They were in this together. They had to be. As they turned a corner, Jake's eyes locked onto a figure standing on the side of the road, a tall man dressed in black, his face obscured by the shadows. Jake's instincts kicked in immediately. Something about this didn't feel right. Without warning, the figure stepped into the street, blocking their path. Jake slammed on the brakes, the bike skidding to a halt just inches from the man. He looked up, his heart pounding as the man stepped forward, his face now visible. It was someone Jake had hoped he would never see again. Someone from his past. Someone who had been part of the Hells Angels. And someone who had a very different agenda than Jake ever did. You're too late, Reaper, the man said with a cold smile. You should have stayed away. Jake's grip tightened on the handlebars, his eyes narrowing. This wasn't over yet. It was just beginning. Jake's hand tightened around the handlebars, his pulse pounding in his ears as the man stepped closer. The shadows of the street seemed to grow darker, the tension thickening the air. His instincts told him this wasn't just some random encounter. This man was trouble, and the fact that he was standing in front of Jake's path now, in the middle of the night, confirmed it. You're too late, Reaper, the man said with a cold smirk, his voice dripping with venom. His eyes were hard, calculating, the kind of eyes Jake had seen in people who had nothing left to lose. You should have stayed away. The words hung in the air like a challenge. Jake's jaw clenched as he sized up the figure in front of him. He knew this man. He had been a part of the Hells Angels for years, just like Jake. But they had never seen eye to eye. He had always been the kind of man who would do anything for power, for control. Jake had walked away from that life long ago, but this man? He had never let go. What do you want? Jake's voice was calm, but his body was tense, ready to react at a moment's notice. The man grinned wider, his lips curling into a sinister smile. What I want you gone. I want everything to go back to the way it was before you decided to play the hero. You were never meant to walk away, Reaper. You were never meant to be a part of the past. Jake's fingers tightened on the grips of his motorcycle, his knuckles turning white. I'm not here to play games, he said, his voice dropping to a low growl. I'm here to protect them. The man's expression faltered for a moment, but then his smile returned, even colder than before. Protect them, he echoed, as if the very idea amused him. You really think you can protect them from this? From us? From the truth that's coming? Jake's heart skipped a beat. What truth? He demanded. The man's eyes gleamed, his lips twisting into a knowing smile. The truth that's been buried for years. The truth you're too afraid to face. Jake felt a cold chill crawl up his spine. His mind raced, trying to make sense of what the man was implying. But before he could speak, The man took a step forward, his voice dropping into a low whisper. You think you can save her? You think you can save Lucy? You can't. You're just another pawn in a game you don't understand. Jake's breath caught in his throat. The words hit him harder than he expected. Lucy? What was this man talking about? He had to stop him before it was too late. He couldn't let Lucy get caught up in whatever this was. He pulled the bike forward, revving the engine, his eyes locked on the man. Stay out of my way, Jake said, his voice ice cold. The man stepped back, his smirk never wavering. I'm not the one you need to worry about, he said, his voice filled with menace. But you will, Reaper. You will. Jake gunned the engine, the roar of the bike filling the empty street as he shot past the man. The sound of tires on asphalt echoed through the night as he sped off, determined to reach Sarah and Lucy before the situation escalated any further. The street blurred around him as he tore through the night, his mind spinning with questions. What did the man mean? What truth was he talking about? And how far was this thing really going to go? He didn't have answers, but one thing was clear. He wasn't backing down. Not now. Not when it mattered most. As he neared the next intersection, he saw the headlights of a car approaching from the distance. He didn't hesitate. He swerved, taking a sharp turn down an alleyway. He had to lose anyone who might be following him. There was too much at stake. He had to protect Sarah and Lucy. And he had to do it now. The alleyway was narrow, the walls on either side closing in like the jaws of a trap. He pressed the throttle harder, the bike responding with a surge of power. He glanced over his shoulder, his eyes darting for any signs of pursuit, but the alley was empty. For now, he breathed a sigh of relief, but the relief didn't last long. His mind raced with everything he had learned. The man in the street, he wasn't just a random threat. He was connected to something bigger, something dangerous. And if Jake didn't act fast, he would be too late. He needed to find Sarah and Lucy. He needed to get to the bottom of this, before everything spiraled out of control. Jake turned another corner, and there, in the distance, he saw the familiar outline of the old house where Sarah had been hiding. It looked abandoned, run down, just like the rest of the town. But Jake wasn't fooled. He knew that beneath the peeling paint and broken windows, there was more to this place than met the eye. This was where it would all come to a head. He parked the bike behind the house, staying in the shadows. He had to approach carefully. He couldn't let anyone see him coming. As he moved toward the back entrance, the sound of footsteps caught his attention. Someone was coming. Jake froze, pressing himself against the wall of the house. The footsteps grew louder, and he could hear the low murmur of voices. He held his breath, waiting for the right moment to act. The voices grew closer, and Jake's heart pounded in his chest. He was running out of time. The door to the house creaked open, and Jake moved swiftly, slipping inside. He had to find Sarah. He had to find Lucy. And he had to get them out before it was too late. Jake's pulse hammered in his chest as he crouched behind the dilapidated wall of the house, listening intently. The footsteps had stopped just outside the back door. His heart raced with a mix of urgency and dread. He couldn't afford to make a sound. He had to get in, find Sarah and Lucy, and get them out before whatever was closing in on them became a full-blown threat. He couldn't afford to wait any longer. The door creaked open. A man stepped into the house, his silhouette dark against the faint light spilling from the hallway. Jake held his breath, watching every movement. He was too close now. There was no room for error. The man didn't seem to notice anything amiss. He walked further into the house, his boots scraping across the floorboards. Jake waited a beat, then slid out from behind the wall, moving quickly and silently toward the back door. His eyes darted to the shadows, scanning for any sign of the others who might be lurking in the house. He couldn't afford to get trapped inside. As he pushed open the door, the faint creak barely registered to his ears, but it was enough to make the man at the front of the house pause. Jake's heart stopped for a moment, but the man, seeming unaware of the shift in the air, continued his movement, his attention still on the hallway ahead. Jake moved quickly, keeping to the shadows, the floorboards groaning slightly under his weight. He found the stairs leading up to the second floor and hurried up them, trying not to let his steps echo. He needed to find Sarah. He needed to find Lucy. The hallway on the second floor was dark, the faint light from the moon outside casting long shadows across the floor. He moved toward the only room with a sliver of light beneath the door. As he reached it, he could hear voices from inside. One was Sarah's, low and strained, and the other. He froze when he recognized the voice. It was Mark's. "You don't understand," Sarah was saying. "They're coming for us. They're not going to stop." Jake's grip tightened on the door handle, but he didn't open it just yet. He listened closely. "I've already lost everything, Sarah. I can't lose her too." Mark's voice was gruff, full of desperation. "I can't." Jake felt a twist of anger at the sound of Mark's voice. He was the reason Sarah had run, the reason she was trapped in this nightmare. The man who had betrayed her and caused all this pain. Sarah's voice trembled as she spoke again. "You don't get it. They'll use her against us. It's too dangerous. We're not safe anymore." There was a long pause before Mark spoke again, his voice lowering as if afraid to be overheard. "We don't have a choice anymore, Sarah. It's done. They know where we are. We've already crossed the line." Jake's fists clenched. The lines were being drawn. This wasn't just about saving Sarah anymore. It was about saving Lucy and stopping the people who had been hunting them from the start. The longer he waited outside the door, the more he could feel the pressure mounting. He had to act now. He couldn't wait any longer. Jake turned the handle slowly, pushing the door open just enough to slip through. He stepped inside, the familiar coldness of the room hitting him. Sarah was sitting on the edge of the bed, her eyes wide with alarm as she looked at him, but it was Mark's face that twisted with shock when he saw Jake. "Reaper," Mark said, his voice harsh with disbelief. "I should have known you'd show up eventually." Jake's eyes locked onto Mark, the hate burning deep in his chest. "You're not taking her anywhere, Mark," Jake said, his voice steady and calm, but with a fire that couldn't be extinguished. "You've done enough damage. It ends here." Mark took a step forward, his hands balled into fists, but Jake didn't flinch. "You don't know what you're dealing with." Mark spat, his voice sharp. "You're too late. It's already too late for all of us." Jake didn't back down. "I'm here to make sure it's not too late," he said, taking another step toward Mark. "I'm here to stop it." Sarah stood up quickly, her eyes darting between the two men. "Jake, please, you don't understand. Mark's right. We're already too far gone. They'll come for us. Come for Lucy." Her voice was strained, panicked. "We have to get out of here, all of us, before it's too late." Jake's eyes softened as he turned to her, his tone gentler. "I'm not leaving without you, Sarah. And I'm not leaving without Lucy." He looked at Mark, his voice growing colder. "You don't get to decide that anymore. You've lost that right." Mark's jaw tightened, and for a moment, Jake thought he might come at him again. But instead, Mark stepped back, his eyes flickering with uncertainty. "You don't know who you're messing with," he muttered, his voice low. "You'll regret this, Reaper. They'll come for you. They'll come for both of you." Jake's heart raced, but he kept his composure. "Let them come," he said, his voice cold with finality. "Because this time, I'm ready." Mark seemed to hesitate for a moment. Then his expression hardened, as if a decision had been made. Without another word, he turned and stormed out of the room, slamming the door behind him. Jake moved quickly to Sarah's side, his mind racing. "We need to go? Now." He helped her up, his grip firm but gentle. "Stay close, and don't say anything. Just follow me." Sarah nodded, her face pale but determined. They had no time to waste. Lucy was still in the other room, and they needed to move before anyone else showed up. Jake's instincts were on high alert as they moved through the house, each creaking floorboard sounding like an alarm. They had to get to the bike and get out of there, but with every passing second, the feeling of danger closing in only grew stronger. The door to the outside was in sight, but just as Jake reached for the handle, he heard the unmistakable sound of approaching footsteps. More men, more trouble, and they were almost too late. Jake's hand tightened around the door handle as the footsteps grew louder, the sound of heavy boots echoing in the hallway. He glanced back at Sarah, her face pale, but her eyes locked on him with a mixture of fear and determination. Lucy stood close by, her small hand gripping her mother's, her innocent face showing nothing but confusion. Jake knew they didn't have much time. The men were closing in, and every second they stayed here made them more vulnerable. Without thinking, he pushed the door open and ushered Sarah and Lucy through, his eyes scanning the surroundings. The back alley was just ahead. There were no streetlights in sight, just the dark, empty stretch of pavement that would lead them to the bike. Jake motioned for Sarah and Lucy to move quickly, his heart pounding in his chest. He could feel the presence of danger closing in around them. They had to get to the bike, get out of there before it was too late. As they hurried down the alley, A loud crash echoed from behind them, the sound of something being thrown against a wall. Jake's stomach twisted. They were being pursued. The footsteps grew louder, faster, and he knew they wouldn't have much time before they were surrounded. They reached the end of the alley, where Jake's motorcycle was parked under the dim light of a distant street lamp. He shoved the bike forward, quickly securing Sarah and Lucy on the back. The engine roared to life, and Jake twisted the throttle, the bike surging forward as they sped down the street. The cold night air whipped past them, and Jake's mind raced, trying to figure out what the hell was going on. Mark's words echoed in his head. "You're too late. They'll come for you." Who were they? And why were they after Lucy? Jake didn't have the answers, but he knew one thing for sure. He wasn't going to let them take her. He wasn't going to let them take anyone he cared about. The city was quiet as they rode through the streets, the sound of their bike the only noise in the empty night. Jake took a sharp turn, heading toward a secluded road that ran along the outskirts of town. He needed to lose any followers and give them some breathing room. Sarah was clutching him tightly, her grip firm as she held on to Lucy. He could feel her fear, but there was something else in her, something more powerful. She wasn't just afraid, she was fighting to survive. And that strength was something Jake admired. As they rode, he glanced over his shoulder, his heart sinking. In the distance, he saw the headlights of another vehicle, speeding toward them. They were still being followed. Jake swore under his breath, tightening his grip on the handlebars. He had to get them to safety. They couldn't outrun them forever. "Hold on tight," he said, his voice low and steady. Sarah nodded, and Lucy squeezed her mother's hand, not fully understanding the danger, but feeling the urgency in the air. The vehicle behind them was getting closer, and Jake knew they had to make a decision. He swerved to the right, heading toward a narrow dirt road that cut through the woods. The rough terrain jolted them, but Jake kept control of the bike, weaving in and out of trees. He could hear the vehicle behind them following, its engine roaring, but the dense trees and uneven ground were slowing them down. "They're not giving up," Sarah said, her voice trembling. "We need to lose them. We need to get away from this road." Jake gritted his teeth. "We'll find a way." He pushed the bike harder, the engine roaring as they sped through the winding path. The trees seemed to close in around them, the darkness growing thicker with every turn. Jake's mind raced, thinking of the quickest way out. His heart was pounding, but he refused to let the fear take over. He had Sarah and Lucy with him, and that gave him the strength to keep going. They could hear the vehicle behind them still coming, but it wasn't gaining on them anymore. Jake knew they had a chance. If they could just make it to the edge of the forest, they might be able to get to a main road and lose them for good. The path began to widen, and Jake saw the break in the trees ahead. It was a clearing. They could get out. His mind was focused on the clearing, his eyes scanning the road ahead. But then, without warning, the vehicle behind them came into view, its headlights blinding as it tore through the forest. Jake swerved to avoid a tree, but the bike skidded, and for a moment, it felt like they might crash. The world spun around him, but Jake regained control, the bike righting itself as he fought to keep them on the road. The vehicle was gaining again. This time, they weren't going to be able to outrun them. The clearing was only a few yards ahead, but Jake knew they needed something more than speed to get away. He took a deep breath, focusing his mind. "Hold on," he said, his voice low but firm. He pulled the bike into a sharp turn, heading straight for the edge of the clearing. Sarah and Lucy held on tight as the bike jumped over a small dip in the road, landing hard on the other side. Jake's heart raced as they approached the trees, the sound of the pursuing vehicle growing louder. He didn't have much time. He took another sharp turn, this one leading them into a small ravine. The bike jolted as they hit the rough terrain, but Jake held steady, his eyes fixed on the path ahead. The pursuing vehicle wasn't far behind, but the steep incline of the ravine was slowing it down. They were gaining distance. Jake pushed the bike harder, hearing the engine roar as they flew through the rough terrain. His heart was racing, his grip tightening on the handlebars as they navigated the ravine's twists and turns. The sound of the vehicle behind them was fading. They were almost there. They just needed a little more distance. Jake pushed forward, determination in his eyes. He wasn't going to let them catch up. Not now. Not after everything they had been through. They burst out of the ravine and onto a dirt road that led into the open. The vehicle behind them was nowhere in sight. Jake finally allowed himself a breath of relief, but he didn't slow down. He kept the bike moving, faster now, knowing they were far enough ahead to lose their pursuers. But the danger wasn't over. Jake knew they couldn't stop yet. They had to keep moving. They had to get somewhere safe. His mind raced with the possibilities, but one thing was certain: they weren't out of the woods yet. Jake's heart was still racing, the adrenaline coursing through his veins as the bike sped down the open road. The danger had been close, but they had made it out. For now, anyway. His eyes flickered over to Sarah, who was still clutching Lucy tightly behind him. They were safe, but only for the moment. They couldn't stop yet. The threat was still out there, lingering in the shadows, waiting for the right time to strike. Jake's mind was spinning, trying to figure out their next move. They couldn't keep running forever. They had to face what was coming, no matter how dangerous it might be. The road ahead was empty, stretching out in front of them like a lifeline. But Jake knew better than to think that the worst was over. There was still so much they didn't know, so many unanswered questions. He had to protect them, no matter the cost. He had already lost so much. He couldn't lose them too. He glanced over his shoulder, making sure no one was following. The night was quiet now, but he knew it wouldn't last. The sounds of the road beneath him felt like the calm before the storm. His grip on the handlebars tightened, his knuckles white. "We need to find a place to lay low," Jake muttered, more to himself than to Sarah. She nodded, her face grim as she glanced around. "I know. I just don't know how much longer we can keep running." "We'll figure it out," Jake said, his voice firm. "I won't let them get to you. I won't let them hurt Lucy." Sarah's eyes softened, her fingers trembling slightly as she tightened her grip on her daughter. I don't know who they are, Jake. All these people coming after us, the things they've done." Her voice faltered, and Jake could hear the fear in her words. "I know," he said quietly. "I know, but I won't let them win. We'll get through this. Together." The bike hummed beneath him as they continued to drive through the night. Jake's thoughts kept racing back to the man in the alley, the one who had warned him that it was too late. What did he mean by that? What was happening behind the scenes that Jake didn't know about? And why was Lucy in the middle of it all? He couldn't shake the feeling that they were running out of time. The silence stretched on, broken only by the sound of the bike and the wind whipping through the trees. Jake's thoughts drifted back to Mark and everything he had said. The warning, the threats, the connection to the Hells Angels. There was so much Jake didn't understand, but one thing was clear: whoever was behind this, whoever was coming after them, they were ruthless. And Jake wasn't going to let them win. Not again. He glanced over at Sarah again, noticing how pale she looked in the moonlight. The exhaustion in her eyes mirrored his own. "We'll find somewhere safe," Jake promised. "You and Lucy are getting out of this, no matter what it takes." Sarah didn't answer, but the look in her eyes was enough. She was holding onto the same hope, the same determination that Jake was. They didn't have much left, but they had each other. And that was all that mattered now. "Look," Jake said, pointing ahead. Up ahead in the distance, there was a small cabin, tucked into the edge of the woods. It wasn't much, but it looked like it could offer them the shelter they needed. Jake slowed the bike as they approached, scanning the area to make sure they weren't being followed. The cabin was isolated, its windows dark, its porch empty. It looked abandoned, just like the rest of the town. "This could work," Jake said as he pulled the bike off the road and onto the dirt path leading up to the cabin. He parked the bike behind a large tree, out of sight. "Let's go," he said. Sarah nodded and helped Lucy off the back of the bike, her movements slow but determined. They moved quietly toward the cabin, the sound of their footsteps muffled by the thick underbrush. Jake opened the door slowly, the wood creaking as he pushed it open. Inside was dark, but the space was small and clean. It was just what they needed. He turned to Sarah and Lucy. "We're safe here for now," he said. Sarah didn't say anything, but she gave him a small, grateful smile. She stepped inside, and Jake followed, closing the door behind them. The warmth of the cabin was a relief, and Jake could feel his tension ease slightly. It wasn't much, but it was enough for the moment. "We need to keep the fire low," Jake said, moving toward the small stove in the corner. "We don't want to draw attention." Sarah nodded, her face still pale but determined. "I'll keep watch," she said softly. "You get some rest." Jake shook his head. "I'm not going anywhere. We'll keep watch together. This isn't over." As Sarah and Lucy sat down on the small bed, Jake sat near the door, his eyes constantly scanning the shadows outside. He knew they couldn't let their guard down. Not yet. He was ready to fight, ready to protect them, whatever it took. The night was long, and the danger was still out there, waiting for the right moment to strike. But for the first time in a long while, Jake allowed himself to hope. They had made it this far, and together, they could make it through whatever came next.